I'm gonna come up from the. It'll be great. Oh no, I'm gonna come up. No, I know we're rolling. Why did you ruin? God, you're so stupid. 2, 3, 4. Beep, boop, boop, boop. Huh. Do 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 do. It's Wednesday. I mean, bleh. Oh hi, I went to the comic book store today. Picks up the This will be very easy to do because I'm flat broke right now. So I only bought technically one title that I have talked about, but you're going to hear about it again. And then Friday I'll go back to the shop. Sorry, I get my studio all arranged here. There we go. That's the way you do it. Huh? Yeah, still a little crooked. That's better. Make sure they get a close-up of the palm of my hand. All right. I was going to make a masturbation joke, but I decided against it. Okay, so, yeah, I wasn't able to spend more than a couple bucks this week. So I bought the one book that I've been reading lately that's really, really been a good time for me, and that is Heroes Reborn, number 4. So as I was going on at length previously, this is a lot of it's a lot of DC references that Jason Aaron is making, which is not the craziest thing, because that's where he got his start, was with Vertigo technically, but still DC before he came over to Marvel. And I have a feeling he probably had a lot of ideas for the DC superheroes. So in this issue, each one of these Heroes Reborn issues is essentially focused on a different member of the Squadron Supreme. This one will feature Dr. Spectrum, Lord of Light, who is analogous to the Green Lantern from the DC comics. And obviously him and Thanos are going to have a frank exchange of ideas. I've been loving this book so far, and the spin-off books, which I also picked up this week, are coming fast and furious now. So first up was Magneto and the Mutant Force, number 1. This one is written by Steve Orlando? Oh, and Cliff Chang. I didn't even notice that. Ooh, gosh. Yeah, that's Cliff Chang, all right. Man, one of my favorite artists. I mean, where's the credits page in this? I'm trying not to look too closely. Oh, it's Bernard Chang. Oh, my mistake. Well, Bernard Chang is still a very good artist. Yeah, Steve Orlando and Bernard Chang on this one. Now, the fun of these books is trying to guess what element of the DC universe this is analogous to. So clearly in this one, since they're fighting Hyperion, and I believe it's been intimated in previous issues that the X-Men as we know them don't exist any more than the Avengers do. Mutants are like outlawed. This is usually how it works for the mutants in any kind of alternate timeline, unless it's House of M. So in this, and then also I noticed this, we have an appearance by Sabra, the Israeli superhero. Maybe not the best time politically, but I mean, I'm sure this was written along. And honestly, I just like seeing this character back. Sabra, if I'm not very, very much mistaken, was created by Bill. I don't know that she was created by Bill Mantlo, but he did use her a lot in his Hulk run, or that's how I remember it anyway. Also, you'll notice Magneto here is also in a chair, and we have the White Queen. You got Rogue, and I'm pretty sure that's Storm. Although it doesn't necessarily, just because it's a black lady. But yeah, I don't know what the Magneto and the Mutant Force. I want to say it's like the Metal Men, but I haven't read enough of the Metal Men to say for sure. Also, this week was Siege Society number 1, and this is clearly what the Thunderbolts have become, because Baron Zemo was the original founder of the Thunderbolts. But as far as parallels to DC, I thought at first it was a Suicide Squad, but then there's another book forthcoming that I think that looks more like the Suicide Squad to me, Squadron Savage. So Siege Society might be Secret Six, or it might be, I'm going to go with Secret Six, even though they're not as big a team as like Suicide Squad, obviously. But again, it's just the fun of it is like, oh, what DC references are going to be made in this? And I think I've said as much. If your brain isn't crammed full of superhero comic trivia, you'll still enjoy this. I mean, But then again, why would you be reading this if you weren't into superheroes? And then finally, also this week, another Tiny Heroes Reborn, Young Squadron #1. Now, this one is written by Jim Zub, who I will admit is not my favorite. I've enjoyed his work in the past, but he took over for Champions after Mark Waid left a few years ago, and honestly, it was to the point where I dropped the book entirely. I even stopped reading it on the app, which it takes quite a bit for me to not read a Marvel comic. Or when I say not read, I put it at the bottom of my to-read stack, which is extensive. So this features, obviously, Ms. Marvel, Miles Morales, the Spider-Man, and Young Nova here. But again, I'm assuming that they would be Young Justice in this case, parallel to DC, Young Justice or Teen Titans or one of those. But I'm also curious, much like with Magneto and the Mutant Force, I think that these kids are probably also vigilantes, like outlaws, because that's also, even though I haven't been reading Champions, that is the story. They did a kind of a Civil War story again, but not a Civil War story. A registration. So like the registration is something that comes up often in Marvel superhero comics. It started in the 80s with the Mutant Registration Act, and then the basis of Civil War was the Superhero Registration Act, which applied to all superheroes, not just mutants. And then they did it again in Outlawed, which was, again, making a lot of assumptions, but I think it was, oh yeah, because I did read the Power Pack tie-in, where it was they wanted to register underage superheroes, which kind of makes sense, actually. I'm surprised it doesn't come up sooner. It's just, I don't really like Champions, I must say. And that was Pixar, and I think it was last week. I got a lot of reading done this week, happily, mostly because I'm moving next week, so I've been putting that off by reading a lot of comics. So I got from last week, and then I got a couple more here to show you. First up was Godzilla Monsters and Protectors #1 and 2. That's fine. I'll tell you this. I mean, it's like I was saying before, Burnham and Schoening both do the Ghostbusters title that I'm a big fan of, that I have, I think, every issue. I think there might have been a crossover with the Transformers that I skipped, but I do enjoy their work. I'm not digging this, if I'm being 100%. It's pretty good Godzilla stuff, but I don't know that I've seen it a million times, but I've definitely seen it more than a couple times lately. And it's especially because this book is mostly, I believe, aimed at the more of a tween audience. And when that happened, it was in the speaking of the Power Pack did it recently. I know the Fantastic Four has done it. It was a while ago, but when Val and Franklin were younger, but where the narrator is a young tween, and they're doing it, the framing device is that they're doing like a YouTube video. So the hey YouTube or whatever, MeTube, I think is what they use in here. And so that's how they're narrating the story. And I can't roll my eyes hard enough at that exact. But that's one of those things where I recognize that that's purely a generational thing. It's not any better or worse than any other framing device or narrative structure. It's just not for me because it's not catering to my needs. And look, when is a straight white man going to have his needs catered to around here, for the love of God? So take that or what you will. I mean, if I gave it, that's the other thing too, is I want to say it's for kids, but if I gave it to my son, he'd be like, that's kind of corny. I have a feeling. I'm just saying it's not just that it's a generational thing. It also, I mean, in a similar way, that sort of thing, when writers write for a younger audience. I don't read a lot of YA stuff. I don't read a lot of kids' books. Not that I dislike them. I mean, there's some very good ones out there. It's just, I'm not a child. I know I read a lot of children's literature, but it's not the same. I read a lot of childish literature. I don't read a lot of children's literature. I'll put it that way. And I hesitate to criticize these creators who have done a lot of work that I really enjoy. It feels like they're pandering. It feels like they're writing to that demographic, but it feels very uncool to me. Like if I were 10 or 11 or 12, maybe I'd be like, all right. Hey, fellow teens. Like it feels like that meme. Just thought I'd throw that out there. It's not a bad book though. I do recommend picking it up. And IDW, I like to support them because they are a good company and they are based in San Diego, California. Also this week I read Shang-Chi #1. I just wanted to refresh myself a little bit. All right, he ends up So all that stuff I was worried about with him having been raised in feudal China, which was actually a subterranean New York, they have totally. I mean, there was that miniseries where they didn't reset everything, but they're just kind of like, okay, here's where Shang-Chi is now. So where Shang-Chi is now is that he has inherited his father's criminal enterprise. He's now the head of it under the name of what? It's the Five Weapons Society. And Shang-Chi is like the knife or whatever the highest is. And his sister is Silk, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, no, his sister was also in the... Silk is a different... Oh, she might be. I can't remember her name now. Anyway, so where this story is going is Shang-Chi is now technically the leader of the Five Knives. What did I just call it? Shang-Chi is the leader of this criminal enterprise, but he's doing what he can to turn it around. He wants to make it not a criminal enterprise. They did a similar thing with AIM back in the early teens, I want to say. 2011, 2012, when Jonathan Hickman was writing Avengers, he had Sunspot, Roberto DaCosta, who is filthy rich. He bought AIM, and he restructured it to be a corporation and to use instead of being mad scientists, they're just plain scientists now. So they're kind of doing a similar thing, I think, with the Five Weapons Society, or whatever it was that I called it. And it's like, okay, I'm fine with it. They have to streamline it. They're not going to address Fu Manchu. They haven't even mentioned him by name, nor even shown him. It's just kind of like, oh, he's living in the shadow of his father. It's something we can all get behind. It doesn't have to tie into the Monk Galassi stuff, but it would be nice if it did. That's whatever. All right. Also this week, I read Red Room by Ed Piskor. This was a lot of fun, but also very gross. Ed Piskor is one of my favorite cartoonists, absolutely. And it is really interesting to see him do something that's not Hip Hop Family Tree or X-Men Genesis, because those are his two. I think those are the only two things. I think no, that's right. I think he drew the Beatniks by Harvey Pekar, which I do own and enjoy quite a bit, even though I don't even like Beatnik poetry. It's in here somewhere. Yeah, they'll figure it out. And then I think he might have done another book with Harvey, and then I think he had a book of his own. But over the last decade, I would say his two main things have been Hip Hop Family Tree and X-Men Genesis. This was very much a departure from either of those. So the Red Room is going to be a horror sort of anthology, and unless I'm very mistaken, it's going to be different. This is self-contained, and following issues will relate, but they'll fit together, but they're all self-contained. So Red Room in this case refers to underground online, like on the dark web, online snuff films basically, but that are usually done live and weirdos watch it, and it's very much a commentary on our permissive society, etc., etc. And he writes in the back how the reason this kind of came about is because it's one of his most, that's to him one of the most horrific things. It's like a scary thing that there are such, and he's like, I didn't dive too deep into it because I didn't really want to know, nor am I going to look up if Red Rooms actually exist. But yeah, the story is there's this network of Red Rooms where different kind of characters, people in different costumes, Poker Face, which looks really cool, and this lady here whose name I can't remember, she's like another one. So they torture and kill people on camera, and weirdos watching them will pay in Bitcoin, and it's all in the dark web, and it's all very gross and everything else. So the story, I mean, I don't mean to be super critical today, but the story's wasn't totally rocking my world, but his art is so good. And I also never had really realized how much he draws like Bob Fingerman, which is, I don't know if I have any of his stuff. Bob Fingerman, and I don't even know if it's, it wouldn't be crazy if Ed Piskor was a fan of Bob Fingerman's, because he is a New York guy too, and so is Piskor. Well, Piskor's in Pittsburgh, but I think he's in New York now. Bob Fingerman was a cartoonist who I first knew from the pages of Cracked magazine in the 80s when it was still a mad ripoff and not a cool website. And then he also drew a bunch of comics on his own in the 90s. And unless I'm no, that was Bill Ray. Bill Ray and Bob Fingerman I get mixed up a lot because they have similar styles. And also because Bill Ray also used to draw for Cracked. But I'm trying to remember the last thing Bob Fingerman did now, and it's driving me nuts. Okay, I can't remember the name of it, but Bob Fingerman did a comic about him and his girlfriend living through the apocalypse in New York City, and it was really good. And then he also had a book about working minimum wage jobs. I think it was called Minimum Wage or something like that, but I have the huge collection of it, which was also really good. But that was one of my biggest takeaways from this book was I was like, oh man, I didn't realize how much Piscator takes a page out of Fingerman's book. So yeah, this is good stuff. I'm looking forward to the next issue. Like the subject matter is not as palatable to me as old school hip hop or old school X-Men, but I still really enjoy Ed Piscator's work and I can't recommend it enough. This was by and large the best thing I bought last week. Is Crime Destroyer, True Till Death #1. So this was written by co-written by Josh Simmons, who is one of the creators of the All-Time Comics universe. All drawn by Shaky Kane, though. I thought for a minute Shaky Kane had just done the cover, but Shaky Kane is one of my absolute favorite artists. He's got a very Dan Clowes, and he takes a lot of pages out of, or he takes a lot, I use that phrase a lot. He takes a lot away from Kirby and the Silver Age, but like very thick line, and frankly just very disturbing artwork. Very much Dan Clowes influences of what I see here, but with like a lot of Silver Age superhero stuff mixed in. And yeah, it's Bulletproof Coffin was the first thing I read by Shaky Kane, and I can't recommend that enough. But really anything Monster Truck or what was the other one? There was another one that he did not too long ago. Anything with Shaky Kane's name on it, though, you can't go wrong. And I would absolutely insist that you read the Bulletproof Coffin. Here is one of my favorite things. So this is a full splash page. It's like the aftermath of a fist fight, but it has all the lyrics in their entirety of Devo's Gates of Steel. So the heavy implication is that this was a big fight scene set to that song, but with only the... that's some comic book making, my friends, and several enemies, I'm sure, watch this. So yeah, this was so good. Like, look at that's very Kirby, the big foreground hand, and very Kirby / Silver Age, because Kirby that was his thing, but a lot of guys ripped Kirby off. But yeah, the all-time comics universe to me anyway, and I would imagine to dudes who are like around my age, because it's all 80s and 90s action comics. Very much what we grew up on. Josh, no, now I'm forgetting his name. Josh Cotter, Skyscrapers in the Midwest. This book right here also takes a lot. It's a little more emo, but there's a lot of that sort of thing too. So it's all guys in their late 30s, early 40s, not unlike myself. As far as you know, I'm in my late 30s. But yeah, there's something about that era of comics that, like the Bronze Age of the 70s, and you have the Golden Age of the World War II era, you have the Dark Era of the 50s, you have the Silver Age of the 60s, and then you have Bronze Age of the 70s. And all of those very distinct eras in comic book history, superhero comics, that should be implied that that's what I'm talking about. But I'm also trying not to equate comics with superhero comics. Aren't I smart? All of those eras in superhero comics, or really in comics in general, have been well represented, like called back to, and their influence, the sorts of influences that they had on comics as we know them now, are plain to anybody who spent more than a couple years reading this garbage. But my era has not really had its comeuppance yet. It's definitely getting there, and with stuff like that. But even in like modern day superhero comics, will call back to. I guess they are starting to call back to the 80s some. But it's, I don't know, there's something about that era it's a little harder to kind of get your, just kind of, try to get your hands on it, you know what I mean? So, whenever it does happen, I'm always particularly pleased. So also this week, I spent a lot of money that I shouldn't have spent on funny books, but hey, I'm gonna get hit by a car tomorrow for all I know. So I ordered a few books from Lone Star Comics out in Arlington, Texas. I think Arlington, Dallas, in that area. mycomicshop.com if you want to go to their website, which I do recommend because as far as online retailers go, definitely the best price, definitely the best shipping and handling. I've never had any damaged books come from them. I don't order a whole lot of high-end stuff, but I've never had any problems with them. I never had any problems with Mile High either, but Mile High, if you comparison shop, tends to be a little pricier. So I go with Lone Star, mycomicshop.com. Tell them Jimmy the Worm sent you. I picked up these 3 issues of Quest Probe. So you have Quest Probe featuring the Hulk, Quest Probe featuring Spider-Man, and Quest Probe featuring the Human Torch and the Thing. There is one thing I don't like about Lone Star is the big old sticker on the bag, but So these comics are a bit of an anomaly. I don't know if that's even the word I want. So in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a computer game company called Adventure International, I believe, and they were among the first to start creating games for home computers, which were still very much a novelty of the time. We had one that was hook up. There was a keyboard with a CPU in it, which I know that term from Tron, and you would plug it into the TV, and I would enter in lines of code for hours so I could see a lightning bolt or something like that. But it was the sort of thing in the early 80s. We had so little else to do, and I was a child. So what difference did it make? But then in the mid 80s, they started making games, and so Quest Probe was a series. It was supposed to be a series of games that would go along with the comics. So there's a Quest Probe Hulk game that goes along with this. There's a Quest Probe Spider-Man game that goes along with this. I haven't done a ton of digging, but it is like I think you can look at the screens on YouTube and stuff. It was largely text-based, though. It wasn't a lot of graphics involved. And I had been wanting these for a while because Bill Mantlo wrote this during his Hulk run, which is my favorite. And it's completely, this was, who cares? It was completely like, it was fine. It was a perfectly suitable story, but they have, so the way it works is the Hulk, each of these characters, they're all being sort of followed around. There's an alien race that is on the verge of extinction. They're trying to, they since they are a what do you call, utopian race, they don't know how to fight. So they're being invaded by these other aliens, and they don't know. So they have to try to get these champions to come, and they have to try to trick them through this portal. And once the Hulk finally jumps through this portal, then it's like, well, find out what happens to him in this game, available at your local Radio Shack. And so you don't know what's going to happen in the game just from reading the comics, but this is again a kind of a niche thing that I like. Promotional comics. Whenever you'd find like Spider-Man goes to Radio Shack, speaking of which, or even stuff like Power Pack teaches you how to not get molested, like those sorts of giveaway. That's not the title of it, but that was a big thing in the 70s and 80s, were these giveaway comics, sort of like mental hygiene for kids, featuring your favorite Marvel superheroes. And I always like that sort of thing because it was like, it's never in continuity. It's always a little cheesy and corny, so it's kind of funny. But also it's one of those things where I feel like, God, they should do more of these. Like, I remember reading a lot of that sort of thing as a kid, not just necessarily comics, but any kind of a very special episode of Different Strokes or something like that. And it always feels like, oh, these people care if something happens to me. That's nice. I don't know. That's something nice. It has nothing to do with Quest Probe. This is straight up capitalism. And then there's a lot of talk in the back pages. The guy who ran Adventure International is Scott Adams, and it's not the same as the Dilbert guy. I checked. But a lot of like, oh yeah, we write this for TRC2 and all these, oh, we can get it for your Commodore, but not for your Intellivision. Like, real outdated and outmoded technology is fun for me to read about, especially when you consider that there was supposed to be a 4th issue featuring the X-Men and a 4th game featuring the X-Men, but the company went bankrupt in 1986 before they could. And that's very schadenfreude to me. I shouldn't laugh at others' failures, but I laugh at others' failures quite a bit. I am in stand-up comedy, after all, technically speaking. And finally, this week, I also bought the first 4 issues of the Priest Cohen run on Steel. Steel, if you're not familiar, was a Superman spinoff that came out of the death of Superman. Well, technically out of the reign of the Superman. So in 93, 92 or 93, because I was a sophomore in high school, I remember that. There was the death of Superman. And then what DC did after it was a huge media blitz. And then after that, DC stopped publishing any Superman comics at all. There were like 4 monthly titles at the time. Stopped printing them all, and then started a story called The Reign of the Superman. And in each title, there was a different sort of claimant to the title of Superman. And 2 of them, one guy was known as the Man of Tomorrow, and he was clearly Kryptonian, but nobody had ever seen him before. So like, oh, did he actually not die? And then there was a cyborg Superman, and then there was Superboy, of course, who in that story, that Superboy, instead of being from a different Earth, was a clone of Superman that Lex Luthor had been trying to make, but they only got him to his teen years. So he became Superboy. And then you had Steel, who was Dr. John Henry Irons, who was just a big fan. And I think he was from the Suicide Slum or whatever part of the bad part of town in Metropolis. This series finds him having changed locale to Jersey City, which I think Christopher Priest seems like the kind of guy who would rather have it in a real town. But also because Jersey City, especially in DC, is not very, there wasn't already a superhero living there. So what Steel did is he just essentially built this armor for himself, slapped the S on it, like in tribute to Superman, and he also has this hammer. So he's not super powered at all, but he is like a science genius. So, he has jetpacks in his armor and stuff like that. And he looks pretty badass. All these covers are also by Dave Johnson, who's one of my favorite artists, and mostly a cover artist. He did all the covers for 100 Bullets, which is how I got into him. That's one of my favorites, so that one's really hot. And so that was where Steel came from, was from that storyline. And then after Superman finally came back, Steel was still a hero in Metropolis, but he was more like a street level guy because he wasn't, superpowered. They gave him his own series right around then, and this is the tail end of it. So by 96, it's up into the 30s. Christopher Priest took over, who I've talked about at length, wrote what I would consider to be the finest run on Black Panther, as well as a million other books and he was, he's been around since the 70s, back when he was Jim Owsley, and he's one of Jim Shooter's guys, and blah, 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 blah. So he took over. I had not read the book up until this point, so I don't really know what was going on, but what do you have to know? So in this, he's moved to Jersey City, and Priest does this thing too, which I really like, where he will make the hero kind of a silent partner in this, and his niece, who is herself, I think, becomes a superhero at some point, and whose name eludes me right now. She does most of the talking. I don't think she narrates the book. I think Steel does narrate the book, but he doesn't do or say a lot. He just fights bad guys, and then his teenage niece, who's living with him, kind of is like the Greek chorus almost. He did a very, very similar thing with Black Panther, where Black Panther almost never spoke, and the whole run was told from the point of view of Everett K. Gill, the CIA agent, played by Martin Freeman in the films. And I love it. I don't know why that doesn't... Garth Ennis will do that sometimes, too. I always think it's a good idea, especially at this point in superhero comics, to do little things like that. Let's take the focus off the title character, which sounds counterintuitive, but it makes for a much more interesting story. And also Dennis Cowan, who was at the time, he had drawn a lot for DC for their Milestone books, and so they had 2 black guys on the same book, which I always like to see, that sort of thing. I mean, and for a black character, it makes sense, but that doesn't always mean it's going to work out that way. Boy, this was a long one today, huh, kids? Well, the fact that I only bought 4 comics, I guess. I wanted this to be 30 minutes even, so how have you been? I'm kidding, of course. I guess we'll see you back next week. I should have a different studio, so